We are in Sefer Mishneh Torah, the Rabbeinu Agadol Rambam, Zichrono Livracha, Perek Sheni. We are in the second chapter of Hilchot Talmud Torah, the beginning of the chapter, Halacha Aleph. I will share the screen with you. Rambam states, Moshivim melamdei tinokoth b'chol medina u'medina. Teachers of Torah are to be arranged and organized and put in place b'chol medina u'medina, in every city. The word medina means usually a large city, often a walled city. That was the original meaning of the term as it appears in the Tanakh. So but this applies also to every town, every place where Jews live. They are required to establish a system, a public education system. When I say public, I'm not referring to how it's funded or what things of that nature. I'm referring to the fact that it is a societal obligation, and it must include all of the children, all the people in that town, in that place. In other words, all the children must be afforded a Torah education. This, of course, does not mean that they cannot learn certain other subjects as well. But it must be understood that the emphasis, when it comes to education, the emphasis must be first and foremost on the study of Torah. Here in Israel, there is an ongoing debate in the political arena with regards to what they call limudei liba, in other words, core studies. In other words, there are people, secular Jews as a rule, although not exclusively so. There are Jews who say, for example, in the religious world, let's say in the Haredi world, more specifically, more particularly, they do not teach certain basic core subjects, English, mathematics, etc. Is there truth to this claim? Yes, there is. Is the current system of teaching Torah or education in general in the Haredi world or in other parts of the religious world, is it ideal? No, it is not. But it is clear that the true core studies, limudei haliba ha'amitiim, the true core studies are Torah studies. The other things are peripheral, not the other way around. That has to be 100% clear. So we read again the words of Rambam. Moshivim melamdei tinokoth b'chol medina u'medina u'b'chol perech u'felech, in every region, in general, wherever there is Jewish presence. This applies also, of course, in Chutz la'aretz, outside the land of Israel, and how much more so in the land of Israel. Wherever there are Jews, they are required to organize themselves and do whatever is necessary in order to establish a proper, functioning education system, whereby the children are taught, first of all, the very basics of Yahadut, of Judaism, of Torah, If you might recall that in the first chapter, I will switch to the first chapter for a moment in Hilchot Talmud Torah. In Halacha, in some editions, Halacha well, or in other editions before us here, Halacha Zayin, you see here. Me'motai matchil aviu lelamedot Torah. From what age is the father required to teach his son Torah? Mishiyathil ledaber, from the moment that the child can begin to speak, which is roughly 2 years old. Melamedo, he begins with the pasuk Torah siwa lanu Moshe, Morasha Kilat Yaakov, well-known pasuk from Sefer Devarim, and the first pasuk of Parashat Shema, or pasuk Rishon Parashat Shema. In other words, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. This is the beginning of education, of Torah education, of Jewish education. Harkach, Rambam continues here, Melamedo ma'at ma'at, pesukim. And in this fashion, the father goes on day by day, week by week, to teach the child another pasuk, another, perhaps even it could be eventually when the child is 5 years old, you could even inject a certain statement from the Mishneh or something like that, which the child can possibly begin to understand. Not something complicated, obviously, but something very basic, like Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, the most basic concepts. In other words, Moshe received the Torah from Hashem at Sinai. And then, Ad Sheyeh Ben Shesh or Ben Sheva, says Rambam, when the child is 6 or 7 years old, Lefi Borio, according to his physical and mental capabilities and strength, Molicho etzem melamed hatinokot. And then, usually the father is not able to teach his son full time every day, all day, and therefore there is a melamed tinokot. There is a teacher. If there is a teacher, it's not only for his son. Usually, that's also possible. You could employ a tutor to teach only your son, and some people certainly did that, and it's possible. But most people could not afford that, and it's a fact that there are usually not enough tutors, not enough chachamim or talmidei chachamim to go around to teach everyone's son privately. So you organize a system, a school, whereby the children are taught the most obvious, basic, fundamental things in the Torah. And the beginning of Torah, of teaching Torah, of course, is the Tanakh. This is the most basic, the point of departure when discovering and understanding and educating Jews to understand what being a Jew is all about and what the Torah is all about. You begin at the beginning, which is the Tanakh. So Rambam, now back to Perek Sheni, back to the second chapter. Rambam says, so we said you have to have a school system. Such a system must be established. This is a societal obligation. The community is responsible to do this. V'chol ir she'en ba tinokot shel beth rabban, a place, a town, a village where there is no school for teaching the children Torah, maharimim et anshe ha'ir ad shemoshivim melamed tinokot. that town, that place is to be put in herem, is to be excommunicated by all other Jews. Until they literally get with the program, until they understand and are forced to understand, if necessary, what must be done. If for whatever reason it was not done till now, it must be done now. It seems clear from Rambam's Lashon here that maharimim here means herem, in other words, excommunication. Excuse me. In other words, other Jews cannot speak with them, cannot interact with them, they cannot be counted for a minyan, you cannot do business with them, you can't even speak to them. So it seems clear from what Rambam writes, maharimim means excommunication, being placed in a state of herem, whereby people cannot speak to you, people cannot work with you, people will have nothing to do with you. And this concept is discussed more fully in Perek Zayin, chapter 7 of Hilchot Talmud Torah. So we will look at the precise details of herem and nidui when we get to Perek Shvi'i. Rambam continues, V'im lo hoshivu, and if they were not chastened by this excommunication, maharivim efa'ir, the city is to be destroyed. You understood correctly. You did not misunderstand. Maharivim efa'ir, the city is to be destroyed, literally. She'en ha'olam mitkayem ela behever pihem shel tinokot shel bet rabban. The world cannot function properly without literally without the sound of children studying Torah. I will expand on this statement in a moment, but before we do so, I wanted to point out the source for this halakha is in the Talmud Bavli Masechet Shabbat Daf Chof Yod Toif Amud Bet. And there it says as follows. We have here the statement, Amar Lakish, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah. En ha'olam mitkayem ela b'shvil hevel tinokov shel bet rabban. So that statement was just quoted now by Rambam. A couple of lines later, we find V'amar Resh Lakish Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah kach mekubelani me'avotai. I have received the following teaching from my forefathers. And there are those who recite this statement of Resh Lakish, not me'avotai, but me'avotecha, not from my fathers, but from your fathers, because he was speaking to the head of the Sanhedrin at that time, Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah. So I heard this from your forefathers, who are also heads of the Sanhedrin. Kol Ir, any city, she'en batinokot shel bet rabban, where there is no such school system for teaching Torah to young children, maharivim ota, it is to be destroyed. Rabina Amar maharivim ota, it is to be put, not maharivim, but maharimim. From Rashi, it seems, Rashi understood it a little bit differently from Rambam. Rashi says maharivim ikashiyur, maharimim lekashiyur, which means that maharivim means it is to be destroyed, but not literally to the ground, not all of it. And maharimim means completely destroyed, In other words, in both cases, according to Rashi, we're speaking about physical destruction. According to Rambam, maharimim means herem, placing in excommunication, which is essentially a very stern warning that this state of affairs cannot be allowed to continue. You must change your ways, and you must establish such a school system. And if not, then maharibim, then it is to be destroyed. Now you may ask, what happens first of all, you may ask what happens to the people who lived in that town? The answer is that they are to be, this is obviously therefore a place where, for whatever reason, as a community, there is no proper appreciation or understanding or commitment to the Torah, to Hashem. In other words, to being Jewish. And therefore, such a place cannot be allowed to remain standing. It has to, this is obviously referring to a situation where the Jews, it could even be in Chutz La'aretz, overseas, where the Jews are autonomous. And there were periods of time when Jews had great autonomy, and they could perform such an act. They could force a Jewish community that was acting in such a fashion to begin changing its ways and establishing such a school. And if not, they could actually do such a thing. It's even more obvious that this would be the case in a Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael, where the regime is based on Torah and the precepts and concepts of the Torah. Clearly, in such a place, the regime, the state, with all the organs of the state, the police force, etc., could and would be required to act in such a way, because such a place has no zechut kiyum, has no right to exist according to the Torah. Anyone who tells you that in absolute terms the Torah is for complete and utter freedom of choice, that every person can choose to do as they please, and the Torah is not something that is to be coerced in any way, anyone who makes such a claim, I think, would have great difficulty understanding this halakha, this statement in the Talmud Masechet Shabbat, or this statement in the Rambam. And by the way, this is not only in the Rambam. It appears in Hilchot Talmud Torah, in the Tur, in Siman Resh Mem He, and in the same Siman, of course, in the Shulchan Aruch. In the Tur, for example, I read from the Tur. Moshivim melamdei tinokoth v'chol ir va'ir. So this should be reminiscent of what we just read a moment ago. Instead of the word medina or medina, Tur changed the lashon and used the term ir va'ir. V'chol ir she'en ba melamed, and any place where this is not the case, when there is no teacher of Torah, there is no school, maharimim anshe ha'ir ad sheyoshivu melamdei tinokoth. As we saw before, they are placed in harem. It seems from the lashon of the Torah that he is following the opinion or the statement as was reproduced by Rambam that we read. In other words, maharimim refers to harem, to excommunication. V'im lo hoshivu, and if they did not change their ways, maharivim ha'ir, the city is to be destroyed. She'en ha'olam mitkayem ela behevel pihem shel tinokot shel beit Rabban. That's in the Torah, and the same in the Shulchan Aruch. This is a basic and undisputed halakha and concept in the Torah. Is it true? Is it a fact that in many situations in the world as it is today, which is in a very imperfect state, that the correct way to deal with people who are distant from Torah or who are rebellious with regards to the Torah and correct Jewish societal norms? Is it a fact that it is not possible today and not advisable, even if it were possible, always, to coerce, but rather to cajole, to persuade, and to adopt a different approach? Yes, that's also true for all manner of reasons, which have to do with the historical breakdown of the Jewish community and the Jewish world over a period of centuries, and it has to do with the general state of the world in which we find ourselves today, which is beyond deplorable. But the basic fundamental truth of the Torah is that the Torah is and was and is to be done, if necessary, by coercion. There has to be the bottom line is that the world cannot function correctly in such a manner if this is not the case. And this is what I said a moment ago, when Rambam says she'en ha'olam mitkayem ela behevel pihem shel tinokot shel beth rabban. You can, which is of course a quote from the Talmud, as we just saw. You can understand this statement in two ways. You can understand it to mean, in some kind of mystical sense, that, which is also true, that without the teaching of Torah to the younger generation, without that sound, the hever pihem, literally the sound, the voices of the children, learning as very young children, as we said, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, studying Torah. Without that, the world is not worthy of existing, and that is true. You can further understand that אין העולם מתקיים אלא בהבל פיהם של התינוקות של בית רבן can be and should be understood to mean that אין העולם מתקיים, the world will not function as it was designed to function. The world will simply not be a normal place, not a place that Hashem is interested in, and that we should be interested in, without such an educational system, without Torah being taught to very young children in a systematic way, day in, day out, as we discussed in the first perek, in the first chapter. In other words, En Olam Mitkayem, not only in the mystical sense, but in the most real and down to earth sense, that the world literally will fall apart. Without Torah, the world falls apart in a moral, intellectual, psychological sense. And then, of course, the ramifications, the outcome of that is societal collapse in every possible sense. That is to say, crime, drug addiction, and all manner of perversion and self-destructive behavior. So, En Ha'olam Mitkayem can be and should be understood in both of those senses. In other words, it's not something in the purely mystical realm. You will also see the results. You will see the ramifications of this policy, of this kind of society will pay a price, and the price will be plain to see. We continue. Halacha beth. מכניסים את התינוקות להתלמד כבן 6, כבן 7. As Rambam also stated in the first chapter, as we saw a short while ago. We look at it again briefly in Halakha Zayin point here in Perek Aleph, the first chapter. Rambam said also that the father begins to teach the child from the moment they can begin to speak. The child can begin to speak at the age of 2, 2.5 at the most, usually. Ad sheyeh ben shesh or ben sheva lefi borio. When he is 6 or 7 years old, he is enrolled in the school. Now here in Halakha Beth, Rambam says, in Halakha Beth, Perek Beth Halakha Beth, מכניסים את התינוקות להתלמד כבן 6, כבן 7, לפי כוח הבן ובניין גופו. According to the child's mental and psychological abilities, and also his physical strength. Rambam adds here, ufahuf mi ben 6 en machnisim otho. Below the age of 6, the child is not to be taken to the school. And here I would like to take a moment to tell you about a conversation that I had many years ago with a professor of, if I'm not mistaken, of psychology, child psychology, and neurology. His name was Professor Steinberg, if I'm not mistaken, Steinberg. His first name I do not recall. He was and is, I think, well known. He was for many years in the Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Yerushalayim. And once I was speaking to him, and he said to me as follows, and it should be noted that this gentleman, Professor Steinberg, is also, I believe he is still with us in this world, is a Talmid Chachamim of some stature. He's Haredi, of Haredi background certainly, and he said to me as follows. He said, the truth is, children should not begin studying in Talmud Torah until the age of 6, as it states in the Halakha. And he says, you have no idea how many Haredi parents come to me with their 5-year-old child. They send their child to these Talmud Torah, which are like, can be compared to some certain schools, kindergartens and primary schools in some parts of the Western world, where the parents are already planning the child's career when they're 28 or 30, and thinking in terms of which schools they will have to apply to which schools they will have to apply, and which universities they will have to study in, and which degrees they will have to receive in order to be successful as they perceive the concept of success. So the parents are under tremendous pressure, and of course this also is conveyed to the child in some way or another. At any rate, in the Haredi world, he was telling me, there are many. The Talmud Torah don't begin at 6 or 7. Why would you do that? Simply because Chazal said so. They begin at 5. So, and in most of these Talmud Torah, particularly the ones in the, shall we say, the Litai world, where the pressure to start studying as soon as possible is very great. They start teaching the children to read at that age, at the age of 5. In some places, even before they turn 5. Now, if a child is clever and the general level of the class is such that a lot of the kids are picking up reading, even though they're too young. Someone asked in the chat whether it's Professor Avraham Steinberg. I think that's probably the name. Yes, I believe so. So they start teaching at the age of 5 or even earlier. They start teaching them to read. First of all, they don't teach them to read necessarily in the correct fashion, the ancient traditional way of teaching children to read. And at any rate, which is a problem, which is part of the problem. And therefore, a certain percentage of these children will not pick up reading at that age. And Professor Steinberg said to me, it's not because there's something wrong with the child. They're just not ready to start reading to learn, start learning to read. If you just wait a year or half a year, everything will be fine. There's no problem. But these parents come to me, these young parents come to me with their 5-year-old who's not picking up reading like his peers in his class are doing. And they think they're convinced there's something wrong with him. He has autism, he's ADD, he's ADHD, he needs a tablet, he needs something else. They're terribly pressured and concerned. And he says to them, there's nothing wrong with your child. The problem is the Talmud Torah. They're simply teaching the child to read before he knows and should know how to read. If you wait a year, everything will be fine. And he says in almost every single case, that's usually the case. It's rare that it's not so. If it's truly the case that the child has some difficulty, that will become apparent later when the child is 6 or 7, and then perhaps some kind of assistance will be in order. But the real problem is they're simply starting too soon. I myself can tell you from my own personal experience. My youngest son was studying in a certain Talmud Torah. He was, and there, of course, you had to learn how to read when you were 5, and he was not picking up learning the reading as well as many other children in the class. And this was a tremendous problem from the perspective of the school. And I told him there's nothing wrong, just wait, and he'll be fine. No, that's not. We begin Kita Aleph, we begin first grade when the child is barely 6 years old, and the child has to read. Without that, we can't accept him. The long and the short of it is, I removed my son from that Talmud Torah, and I found one of the very few, maybe one of 2 perhaps, or something like that, in all of Yerushalayim. I found a Temani Talmud Torah, a Haredi Temani Talmud Torah. When my son got to this school, to this Talmud Torah, he could not read. 2 weeks later, and I'm being precise, 2 weeks later, he could read both Israelit and Temanith. He could read both Israeli pronunciation and Temani pronunciation, not perfectly, but quite reasonably well. Let's say 85% proficiency. 3 weeks later, he could read both ways perfectly. I timed it, I looked at it, I checked it. That's exactly what happened. The difference was they're both, the reality was that there was a process of maturation probably in his mental abilities because of the time that it had elapsed. They began teaching him, 6-8 months earlier, and his brain wasn't there yet. I remember when the month we moved him from the first school in the month of Siwan towards the end of the year. In other words, early midsummer. And as I say, within 2 and 3 weeks, he could read perfectly both Israelit and Temanith. And I attribute this to two reasons. A, the fact that he was simply maturing at a very rapid rate, as children do at that time. That's how they're designed to develop. There's no reason and no need to try and outsmart Hashem and jumpstart things before they're supposed to happen. That's how it's supposed to happen. Around that age, exactly, Keven Shesh, that's exactly when he was able to start picking it up. But the other important thing is to know how to teach to read. This Temani Mori was tremendous. Was a tremendous teacher, a wonderful person, and he knew how to teach, and was a different method completely from how they had been trying to teach children to read in the first Talmud Torah, which was a non-Temani, non-Haredi Talmud Torah, and they were using a completely incorrect method. The standard method, which Avi Mori alav Shalom described to me in detail, also how he was taught to read at the age of 6. By the way, he told me exactly the same thing. My father related to me many times. We began at the age of 6 to be taught to read, which is exactly what we just read now in the halakha. And he said within 2 weeks, the entire class was reading. It's exactly what he told me. And he also described to me how they were taught. They were taught in the following manner. This is mispronounced, of course, using Central European pronunciation, but they were taught Kumetz Aleph Ul, Kumetz Bais Bul, Kumetz Gimel Gul. In other words, you see an Aleph with this tenuah beneath it, you pronounce it this way. You see this letter with that tenuah, with that vowel beneath it, or above it, you pronounce it this way. And they just learned by rote. They just repeated it, and they had charts and they had books, and they repeated it time and again. I saw this done in this Talmud Torah, and the results were unbelievable. So you see, to get back to the text, you see that when Chazal say something, they are not guessing or shooting from the hip. When they say Keven Shesh, Keven Sheva, that's exactly what it means. And when Rambam says Ufachut mi ben shesh en machnisim oto, he is not to be taken to the school before the age of 6. Rambam knows exactly why he's saying this, and it's entirely true. And I saw this with my own eyes. And I saw it with my own eyes with regards to my son, but I also have no doubt and have heard from many people, including this Professor Steinberg, that this is a common occurrence. You take the best children from the best families with the highest IQ, you try and teach them to read in the wrong, using the wrong methodology, and B, too early. Some of the time, 20, 30, 40% will run into trouble. If you use the correct methodology, which has been used in Am Yisrael for thousands of years. And we don't need, therefore, the newfangled ideas of some professor of education in some university who has to justify his existence and his tenure by coming up with a new method for teaching how to read, which he, of course, picked up from textbooks written in English, as if you can compare reading English to reading Hebrew. The only way to teach read English is to read globally, what's called globally. You look at the word station, and you have to figure out what you do with these letters, and it's not done phonetically, correct? It cannot be understood phonetically. You can't teach that way. So you take all kinds of ideas that these poor professors in various English-speaking or European countries come up with to try and figure out how to teach children to read this impossible language that we call English, which is written in the most impossible way, because for all kinds of historical reasons that we don't need to go into. We'll just mention the fact that you take the Roman alphabet, which was not designed for an Anglo-Saxon language or the French language or the Hungarian language, and you force the round peg into a square hole. So you don't have a sh, you don't have a consonant sh in English, in Latin. So what do? When in English you do have such a consonant? So you have to come up with some combination of letters. So in English it's sh, in French it's ch, in other languages it's something else. And there are other sounds which don't exist in Latin, but do exist in Bosnian or whatever it is, and you have to come up with some combination, and it's all very convoluted and very complicated. So you can only teach to read globally. But Hebrew, the brilliance of the system of the alphabet, which originated with the Jewish people, despite the fact that some archaeologists like to claim it's Phoenician, because they just like to remove from us anything that we have done and hand it over to somebody else. But in fact, the Jews are the earliest people known to have used such an alphabet, and we have found in archaeological finds tablets on which children were practicing to write the letters, going back 3,000 years. In simple agricultural settlements in Eretz Israel. It's quite amazing, but that's the truth of the matter. So the alphabet is simple, straightforward, and it entirely dovetails with the language, with the consonants, with the sounds of that language. So if there's a sh consonant, there is also a letter which is a sh. If there is whatever sound you have is immediately reproduced or represented by a certain image. by one letter, not a combination of letters for one thing. Then, of course, you have the vowels. So if you teach phonetically, teach how to read phonetically, it's actually very straightforward. It's halacha gimel. ויושב ומלמדן כל היום כולו ומקצת מן הלילה. And already at that age, as we said, 6 or 7 years old, the children begin to learn all day. Not from 8 to 1 p.m. or 8 to 2 p.m., all day. They have breaks to eat, to play. Absolutely, they have to play, no question. They have to have some sporting activities. They can occasionally have some excursion, some tiyul, but they have to learn all day and into the night, into the evening, when it becomes dark. In order to train them that Torah is to be studied both during the day and at night. And the children are not to be exempted from study. They cannot be given days off. Except for Erev Shabbat, Friday, or the day before a Hag, Erev Yom Tov, towards the end of the day, shall we say, the last few hours of the day, they are allowed to go home. Everyone has to get ready for Shabbat. Everyone has to prepare for Yom Tov. Uv'yamim tovim, and on Yomim Tovim themselves. Yomim Tovim, there is no school, says Rambam. Aval v'Shabbat, but on Shabbat, there is school. En korim lechatchila, which means they do not learn new material that they have not seen before. So they haven't yet learned Perek Yod Gimel of Yehezkel. They will not learn that Perek on Shabbat. What they will do is review Prakim Teth, Yod, Yod Aleph, and Yod Bet that they learned the previous week. This past week, that they will learn on Shabbat. They will review, they will go over the material. En korim lechatchila, but shonim l'rishon. But they go over, they repeat, they review that which they have learned before. This would apply both to Tanakh and at a later age to the study of the Mishnah. They would review, they would do Hazara on the Mishnah on Shabbat, and rather than learning new material on Shabbat, so that Shabbat would be an easier, more relaxed experience on the one hand. So there should be some difference in terms of Shabbat and Hol. So there's a certain honor of Shabbat on Shabbat, so that you are studying things you've already seen once, and perhaps you are required to make less of an effort on one level. On the other hand, there has to be study of Torah on Shabbat as well. There should be.
Rav?
Yes.
Would they be learning on Purim too, which is in some ways a mini Yom Tov?
It's a good question. It doesn't state this explicitly, not here in the Rambam or in other places of which I'm aware. It seems to me quite reasonable that there should be some school, at least a few hours on Purim. It does not seem right to me that the entire day needs to be taken up by Mishloach Manot, and certainly not by getting drunk or anything of the sort. And children, there's no reason why that entire day should go by without the children studying Torah at least a little bit. So the normal order would be, it seems to me, in the morning there would be tefillah, and the Rav would also come, and they probably daven together. That's usually what happens in schools with young children. And then they would learn for at least till the late morning at the very least, I would think. And then there's time to put Mishloach Manot, and there's time to do whatever else has to be done. And then there's time for the Seudah, for the Purim meal. It seems to me that should be the order of the day. Even for the purpose, for the aim of building the Beth Mikdash, children are not given a day off. Even if all of Am Yisrael is now required to participate in physical, real terms, in assisting in the building of the Mikdash, Tinokot shel Beth Rabban, young children who are in school studying Torah, they are not to be given time off. And that should convey the concept quite completely, and it should not leave much room for doubt what the priorities should be. So it goes without saying that, for example, if for building the Beit Mikdash, children are not to be given a day off or given time off, even for that purpose, then I think the answer should be quite clear with regards to, shall we say, Lag BaOmer. If the minhag, the practice is a Lag BaOmer that you're absolutely required to have a bonfire, and the children are absolutely required to stay up all night or till a very late hour at this bonfire, and therefore they couldn't possibly get up on time in the morning to go to school, and therefore there are no studies anywhere in the country, here in Israel at least, on Lag BaOmer, well, I think or at least in very few schools perhaps there might be, but generally that's not the case. And I think you understand that is completely topsy-turvy, especially when we're being told that on Lag BaOmer, the reason we're celebrating Lag BaOmer, according to many people, is because Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai passed away on that day, which is also not true, entirely untrue, as is mefurash in Kidvei Ha'ari, as is mefurash, stated by the Hida, as repeated by the Ben Ish Hai. So we're told that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai died on this day, and Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai famously was always studying Torah and never stopped for a moment, and therefore the Yerushalmi says that he was patur from tefillah because he was studying Torah. But then we're going to celebrate this by having a bonfire, keeping the children up all day so they won't be able to study Torah the next day. Somehow that doesn't strike me as reasonable. We shall stop here. Hayu beruchim, hizku v'yames levavchem, kol ha'meyahalim l'Adonai.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.